She walked in wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt. What she walked out with changed everything. Boston Luxury Motors gleamed like a palace of polished glass and chrome under the morning sun. Exotic cars, Porsche, Bentley, Aston Martin, Ferrari, lined the showroom floor like trophies in a billionaire's cabinet. To the salesman who worked there, image was everything. So when she stepped through those doors, they didn't see a customer. They saw a mistake. "I'm sorry, but I think you're in the wrong place," the salesman sneered, his eyes flicking over her scuffed sneakers. "These vehicles start at $300,000. He motioned toward the exit like he was doing her a favor. Behind him, staff snickered. A few customers stared. Her cheeks flushed, but she said nothing. She simply turned and walked out, silent. The next morning, everything changed. A custom midnight blue Rolls Royce Phantom purred to a stop outside the dealership. The driver stepped out, white gloves immaculate, and opened the back door. When she emerged, the same salesman's jaw dropped. He never saw it coming. The day before, Maggie Collins had entered the dealership for one reason: her sister's 40th birthday. Caroline had survived breast cancer, and Maggie, who never spent money on herself, wanted to give her something unforgettable. The car had to be perfect. She'd spotted it in the showroom. A sleek, limited edition, midnight blue Azure Coupe. One of only 15 made that year. Price tag, $285,000. For Maggie, it was well within reach. But no one looking at her would have guessed that. At 35, Maggie was unassuming. Brown ponytail, no makeup, faded jeans, soft voice. But beneath that simplicity was a woman who had changed lives. Founder of the Collins Foundation for Children with Disabilities, she had poured her heart into building a legacy, helping thousands of children across the country. She didn't flaunt her success. She lived quietly, purposefully. And if people judged her for it, so be it. She walked through the showroom like any other customer. Calm, observant. She smiled at the first person who greeted her. Daniel, a young salesman, maybe mid-20s. Nervous, but kind. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors," he said. "I'm Daniel. Is there something specific you're interested in today?" Before she could answer, someone else intervened. "I'll handle this, Daniel." Blake Thompson. He adjusted his tie and offered Maggie a smile that felt more like a warning. Sales manager, sharp suit, sharper attitude. A man who thought he could smell wealth, and he didn't like what he saw. "Looking for directions, ma'am?" he asked, tone dripping with polite insult. "Actually," Maggie replied, still pleasant, "I'm interested in that midnight blue coupe." She pointed toward the Azure. Blake's expression faltered for half a second, then reset into patronizing disbelief. He'd seen this before. Daydreamers, time wasters, people who walked in for a fantasy and walked out with a brochure. He didn't have time for this, not today. "That's the Azure," he said slowly, as though explaining to a child. "Limited edition. Only 15 made. Cost nearly 300 grand. He gestured vaguely down the street. "Maybe check out our used car division? 3 blocks east." Maggie didn't flinch. She'd been judged before. People always made assumptions. She was used to it. "I'd really like to learn more about this one," she said. "Is it possible to see the interior?" Behind Blake, 2 other salesmen exchanged smirks. Blake's tone cooled. "The Azure is by appointment only," he lied smoothly. We reserve it for serious clients." And just then, the showroom doors opened again. A couple walked in, draped in designer labels, confidence oozing from every step. Blake lit up. "Please excuse me," he said to Maggie, already turning away. "Daniel can get you a brochure." He strode off with theatrical warmth. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, wonderful to see you again." Daniel lingered beside Maggie, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm really sorry about that," he said, his voice low. "Would you still like me to tell you about the Azure?" "I would," Maggie said with a soft smile. "Thank you." As Daniel described the car's features, Maggie glanced across the floor. There he was, Blake, leading Mrs. Harrington to the exact same coupe he'd said was unavailable. She watched as he opened the door for her with a flourish, inviting her to sit inside. No appointment, no hesitation. "I understand how these things work," Maggie said quietly, but she didn't walk away. Not yet. Daniel was still speaking, rattling off horsepower, handcrafted interior details, voice-activated features. But Maggie's attention had shifted. Across the showroom, Blake stood beside the Azure, beaming like it was his. With practiced flair, he opened the door for Mrs. Harrington, ushering her inside the very car he'd told Maggie was off-limits. "That's quite all right," Maggie said softly to Daniel, noticing his growing discomfort. "I understand how these things work." Blake, meanwhile, was in full performance mode. "This particular model has a waiting list of 8 months," he told the Harringtons, "but I've set one aside for special clients." Mrs. Harrington trailed a manicured hand along the leather seats. "It's exquisite," she said, "but I'm not sure about the color." "We could certainly discuss custom options," Blake assured her, voice smooth as silk. Maggie approached quietly, just close enough to be heard. "Excuse me," she said, calm but clear. "I was hoping to inquire about purchasing this model." Blake's smile vanished. His face reddened as he turned toward her. "As I mentioned earlier," he said tightly, "this vehicle is being shown to these customers. Perhaps you could come back another time, or, as I suggested, check our used car options." The Harringtons glanced between them, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm specifically interested in this car," Maggie said again, her voice even, "for my sister's birthday next month." Blake exhaled through his nose and stepped away from the couple, lowering his voice like he was about to explain something obvious to someone who didn't understand how the world worked. "Look, I understand people like to dream," he said, "but this is a place of business. That vehicle costs more than most homes. Now, I've been patient, but you're interrupting a legitimate sale." A few heads turned. Conversations quieted. Daniel hovered nearby, looking anxious. "I'm prepared to make a cash purchase today," Maggie replied, still composed. That's when Blake cracked. He let out a short, cutting laugh, sharp enough to draw attention across the floor. "A cash purchase?" he repeated loudly. "Really?" He swept a hand toward her clothes, smirking. "This isn't a yard sale. We're talking about $250,000. People who can afford these cars don't dress like—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Maggie felt the familiar sting of judgment. But it wasn't shame she felt. It was anger. Not for herself. For every person who had ever been dismissed for looking like they didn't belong. "I believe my money is as good as anyone else's," she said quietly. Blake took a step closer, looming. "Let me be clear," he said, no longer pretending. "You are wasting my time and embarrassing yourself. Either make an appointment for a serious discussion, dressed appropriately, or leave the premises. The entire room froze. The Harringtons had moved away from the car, no longer interested in the show. "Is there a problem here?" a new voice asked. It was deeper, authoritative, one that made Blake straighten instantly. Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, had entered the scene. "No problem, sir," Blake said quickly, adjusting his tie. "Just explaining to this lady that we operate by appointment for serious buyers." Mason's eyes moved between Maggie and the crowd that had gathered. He didn't need much time to size up the situation. His posture stiffened. "I see," he said. "Ms. Collins?" Maggie offered, correcting him gently. "Margaret Collins." "Miss Collins," he said, voice thin. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Our clientele typically, well, they understand the exclusivity of our vehicles." "I understand perfectly," Maggie replied, her voice unwavering despite the fire still burning in her chest. "Your sales manager has made your policies quite clear." Blake couldn't help himself. He stepped forward again, his tone dipped in contempt. "If you're genuinely interested, which I doubt, you can call for an appointment. But I'd suggest bringing proof of funds and dressing the part." He swept his hand toward the showroom's glittering lineup. "These cars," he said, "are for a certain class of people." "Are for a certain class of people." The words hung in the air like smoke. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Someone chuckled under their breath. Maggie turned, eyes scanning the room. The stares. The judgment. The smirk on Blake's face. The silent approval in the owners. She'd faced subtle prejudice before, but rarely had it been this blatant. This loud. This public. "I see," she said softly. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the exit, dignity intact, even as something inside her bent under the weight of the moment. Just before the door shut behind her, she caught Blake's voice, pitched just high enough for effect. "Some people just don't know their place." The comment stung, but Maggie didn't flinch. She stepped into the sunlight, pulled out her phone, and dialed. Her expression unreadable, except for the faintest, resolute smile that curled at the corners of her lips. The Collins estate sat quietly on 5 acres just outside Boston. Its elegance was subtle, its luxury understated. Exactly the way Alexander Collins liked it. No gates, no gold, no excess. Just warmth, privacy, and peace. At 41, Alexander had built a fortune revolutionizing renewable energy storage. He could have had the world shouting his name, but instead he preferred a quiet life, lived with purpose. It was Maggie who helped him see the power in that. When she entered his home office, he looked up from his desk and rose immediately. 15 years of marriage had taught him to read her face like a book. "What happened?" he asked, moving to her side. Maggie sat down slowly in the leather chair across from him. The weight of the day, the stares, the laughter, the dismissal, came rushing back. "It was educational," she said, the words edged with a dry smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She told him everything: Blake's sneers, the humiliation, the way he waved her off as if her presence tarnished the room, the couple, the crowd, the owner who stood by and watched it happen. Alexander listened without interrupting, his expression darkening as the story unfolded. When she finished, she leaned back, exhaling. "It's not about me," she said. "I know who I am. I have the privilege of walking away knowing the truth. But how many people get treated like that every day, without the comfort of knowing they could afford everything they're being denied?" Alexander nodded slowly. This was Maggie. Not just strong, but conscious. Not just wounded, but still thinking of others. "So," he said gently, "what do you want to do about it?" Maggie hesitated. "Part of me wants to do nothing. Just buy Caroline's gift somewhere else and let it go." She looked at him, her voice steadying. "But then I think about Daniel, the young salesman who treated me with respect, no matter how I looked. And I think about all the people who face that kind of judgment, with no one to speak up for them, no one to see their worth." She met his eyes. "These people need to understand that worth isn't determined by appearance. I don't want vengeance. I want awareness." Alexander leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. "I think I might have an idea that accomplishes both," he said. "Nothing dramatic," Maggie warned with a raised brow. "No buying the dealership and firing everyone." He chuckled. "Nothing so cliché, but maybe," he leaned forward, eyes gleaming, "maybe a little education is in order." Together they crafted the plan, not out of spite but out of hope, not for payback, but for perspective. Something that could change hearts, not just headlines. "Are you sure you don't want to come along?" Alexander asked, once the details were finalized. Maggie shook her head. "This isn't about me witnessing their comeuppance. It's about them learning to see people differently." She paused, then smiled. "But I do expect a full report." As the evening sun dipped behind the trees, Alexander made the first of several phone calls. Quiet, decisive, and full of purpose. Tomorrow would be a new day. One dealership, one lesson, one chance to open a few eyes. And this time, they would see far more than a white t-shirt and jeans.